Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Bryant Park Reading Room. Thank you all for coming. We have a great panel of summer reads today. And also we have a great lineup of events coming up. On Monday, there's HSBC Business and Finance. Tuesday's Book Club and Poetry. And next Wednesday's author welcomes author Susan Reiger and her latest book, The Heirs. Susan will be joined by her daughter, also an author, Maggie Pouncey, who wrote Perfect Reader. A couple of thank yous. John from Kinnickinnia Books is here. Thank you, John. And, of course, all the authors will be here after the program to sign copies of their books. A special thank you to Anna Dobin, Elena Hershey, and Ashley Hewitt from Penguin Random House, and Brittany Hillis from St. Martin's Press for their help with today's program. And finally, our partners at HSBC Bank. We are grateful for HSBC's support of the 100-plus programs we produce in the Reading Room each season. Thank you, HSBC, for all you do for the Bryant Park Reading Room. And now I'd like to introduce our guest host for today's program. Robin is no stranger to the Reading Room. This is your third time here? Oh, yes, and we really appreciate her input and her great panel discussions of everything. She's always been an avid reader. From sneaking copies of Judy Blume from her childhood librarian to developing her own radio program, Reading with Robin in 2002, Robin is a literary influencer and book pusher in her own right. Over the past 14 years, Robin has built a devoted and passionate following both in her local Rhode Island and online. In addition to her talk show, Robin has hosted numerous author events, including her annual Evening with Authors and Summer with Robin. We are very pleased to have her back in the Reading Room with us here today. Please join me in welcoming Robin Kale.
Thank you. This is my favorite summer weather. I don't know about any of you, but I am so happy that I'm not sweating. So if you're cold, so sorry, and nothing to do with it. Welcome to Bryant Park's Reading Room. Thank you so much, Susie Siegel, for inviting me back for my third summer. I love the tradition, and this panel, Susie and I had a great time putting this together. 5 fabulous books for your summer reading, because I'm sure summer at some point will be coming. I'm going to introduce each of the authors, and they'll talk for a couple of minutes and or read whatever they'd like to do, and then we will have a conversation when I get the signal. And as Susie said, books are for sale, and the authors would love to sign them afterwards. And it is gift-giving season, graduations, teachers, summer reading, and if you're going to stay at someone's home, what's better than bringing them a lovely signed book? Nothing, really. So I'm going to go this way and introduce my new best friend. Wes Moss' work has appeared in the New York Times, Salon, McSweeney's, the Saturday Evening Post, and elsewhere. She's the winner of the Great American Fiction Contest and 2 Faulkner Wisdom Gold Medals. The Subway Stops at Bryant Park is her first book, a collection of short stories, all of which are connected to Bryant Park right here in Midtown Manhattan. She's a MacDowell Fellow and has just finished writing an illness memoir called Fruitless. I love this collection of stories, and I know you will too. Well, and to her family and friends, thank you for being here. There's a party. Welcome to you, Wes.
You know, of course, there's no better place to be reading this book than here, although they disagree. But I'm. Yeah,
you just go right in between the toots.
Yeah, there. Okay. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about the book, particularly because we're sitting in Bryant Park. This is a short story collection in which all of the stories are connected in one way or another with the park you're sitting in right now. And I got to do some really great research. I was connected to the park because my mother and father had a tiny little apartment just over there next to the dark brick building, which is the Radiator Building. And they had it for 40 years. My mom still has it. And my dad and I spent a lot of time in this park, listening to the live piano music that's going on right now, and just people watching. Mom and I will sit at the fountain on mornings, like some of you maybe, and play tourist, not a tourist. That game? I don't know. Right. And I'm sure we're right every time. So we were just saying maybe someday I'll do a walking tour of the park to go with the book, because if you love this park, you probably know a lot of the cool stuff in the park, from the Gertrude Stein statue. Can you hear me? Yeah. So the Gertrude Stein statue, there's a story that centers around that, and it's one of my favorite statues. There are very few statues of women, much less women authors, and so to have Gertrude Stein in the park, I think is great. But also, I got to do research about things you might not know about, even if you're a native New Yorker. For instance, if you look over at the lawn there, that shows you the outline of what's underneath the lawn, which is 2 floors of library stacks. Millions of books are under there, and I got to have a tour, which was really cool. And so, because I wanted to have a character in the book that works at the library, which is right behind us, and I felt that if I was really exploring the park as a place, a character in the book, I wanted to go under the park too. And so I got to do that. So I'm going to just read you the first page from the final story in the collection that's from the point of view of Timothy, who works in the library, but it starts off at that fountain over there that many of you know. Timothy stood at the fountain, his hand inside his coat pocket, rubbing 2 quarters against one another. He'd walked past this fountain on his way to work at the library hundreds of times and had never thrown his money in, but today he did think about it. Although what would he wish for? There wasn't anything to wish for exactly. He had gotten up in the middle of the night as usual, getting a bleary-eyed drink of water in the dark and visiting the bathroom, and realized only in the morning that he had not heard the sound of his cat, Bipsy's paws, trotting behind him. She was old, but still she followed him everywhere. How had he not noticed the absence of that particular sound? It was as though he had failed to notice the stopping of his own heartbeat. He'd felt all strangled inside when he figured things out. Now what, he kept thinking as he made the coffee and packed his lunch for work in silence. Now what? Timothy looked up at the branches of the London plane trees overhead in the park and could see birds everywhere, busy, busy, busy. April was the right time for them to be swooping between treetops and lampposts, hopping on the ground for muffin crumbs. He mourned never learning their names. His mother and brother had known the names of birds, but he'd never latched on. They could tell one songbird from another, could look up at the underwing of a bird lofting up like a kite against the blue sky and say peregrine falcon or turkey buzzard in hushed and intimate tones to one another. He was never part of their circle, but had watched from the side, a tiny little circle of his own, intersecting nothing. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Moss. Next up, Courtney Mom is the author of the acclaimed novel I Am Having So Much Fun Here Without You, and great title, and the recently released Touch, and the chapbook Notes from Mexico. Her short fiction, book reviews, and essays on the writing life have been widely published in outlets such as the New York Times, O Magazine, Tin House, Electric Literature, and BuzzFeed. And she's co-written films that have debuted at Sundance and won awards at Cannes. At various points in her life, she's been a trend forecaster, a fashion publicist, and a party promoter for Corona Extra. She currently works as a product namer for MAC Cosmetics and other companies from her home in Litchfield County, Connecticut. Welcome, Courtney.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be back. I was here with my first book, and it's great to be here with my second. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay.
Just don't move.
Okay, we'll work with it.
Yes.
About 3 years ago, I started getting a little concerned about something. I was watching my friends and the way that we were interacting, and I started to notice that my friends, many of whom work in creative fields like myself, seemed suddenly unable to make a decision without consulting their phone. Right? So we would be together and someone would say, I'm hungry. Are you hungry? I'd say, I'm hungry. And then instead of just gaming it out and maintaining eye contact, well, what do you feel like eating? Oh, I heard there's a new place. It was, my phone says I'm hungry. I took 500 steps today so I can eat. And, my phone says there's a new arepa place. And I saw this across the board. My friends who were single, instead of looking up in the world, they looked in their phone and they let their phone tell them who they should be attracted to. I used to work in trend forecasting. So human intuition is something I really, really cherish. And I started to wonder if it was perhaps going extinct. So touch is my effort to answer that question. Is it going extinct? And what does it look like if human intuition is endangered? Touch is a story about a very famous trend forecaster named Sloane Jacobson, who's hired by a huge tech company to figure out the next trends in technology. The only problem is while she starts working there, she starts to believe that the next big thing in tech is actually touch and face-to-face interaction and no smartphones. So employer's not, you're happy about that? Her employer's not too keen on her predictions. She's a woman who, even though she's paid to look for connections, is very disconnected herself. She's estranged from her family. Her love life is a dumpster fire. She doesn't really have any personal friends. And in the book, really her closest friend is her driverless car that Mammoth has supplied. Mammoth is the tech company that they've supplied her with. It's her closest friend, and the car's name's Anastasia. And I'm going to read a short excerpt between the two of them. Out on the street, Sloane contemplated her options. It was a beautiful day, cool, crisp, electric with the promise of things that could go wrong or right. It was rare a balmy day like this in mid-November, and Sloane wanted to walk to Mammoth's headquarters in Union Square, but she imagined it would be bad form if she didn't show up for her first day of work in the company-sponsored driverless car. So she swiped left on the M-Car app that would summon her chariot from wherever it was that Anastasia recharged. Sloane liked to imagine the car in a set of imperial stables with gloved stable hands and chandeliers, the peaty scent of draft horses warming the cold air. Upscale stable or commonplace garage, it was somewhere close, that much was for certain. Anastasia came purring around the corner in 2 minutes flat. Good morning, Miss Jacobson, Anastasia chirped once she got in. Coffee? I have wonderful milk. Or have you already had caffeine? Sloane looked gratefully at the coffee machine retrofitted into the seat divider. What she would sacrifice in terms of health benefits from not walking to work would be gained by not having to frequent the sadomasochistic espresso joints where the employees acted more like glass blowers than baristas. She didn't have to tell Anastasia how she took it. Her driver had filled it 1/4 of the way up so that she could make it light and sweet. Sloane wasn't a latte girl, or rather, she had been until she moved to Paris. Tourists wax poetic about the quality of that city's espresso, but rarely will you hear someone applaud a French waiter's way with milk. To the office, then? Sloane was thankful for the hesitancy in Anastasia's voice. She wanted to believe in a world where all her choices hadn't been made yet, where she could say no, she'd much prefer a winter picnic on Coney Island, or demand that Anastasia head northward for an unplanned getaway to Cape Cod. Spontaneity went hand in hand with longevity. This was something her father had taught her. He who was enigmatic to perfection, encrypted to a fault. A lot of good it did him, though, being surprising. How are you settling in, Miss Jacobson? How is the apartment? You can call me Sloane, Sloane said, draping a linen napkin across her chest in case the lighter's technology caused them to halt in front of a pothole. Probably I should stop there, I think.
You can read the rest. They're available right in the back.
Yes.
So good. Thank you, Courtney. All these books, I just, as I'm thinking about these books, I'm loving this panel even more because I really enjoyed all of them so much. Next up, Dan Riley is the senior editor at GQ magazine. He grew up in Manhattan Beach, California, graduated from Duke University, and lives right here in the city. Fly Me is his first novel. It's out just yesterday. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Okay, so Fly Me is a novel set in 1972 and 73 in a fictional beach town in Southern California called Sala del Mar, and it's on the edge of LAX. And like a lot of the towns at that time near the airport, it's home to pilots and stewardesses who are based out of Los Angeles. Fly Me's about two sisters, mainly 22-year-old Susie Whitman, who follows her sister sort of inadvertently out to Sala del Mar to fly for an airline called Grand Pacific Airlines. And it's about this town. It's about these sisters, but it quickly becomes also about a drug running scheme that Susie gets caught up in, running coke back and forth from Los Angeles to New York. And then also the skyjacking epidemic of that time, which for those of you who don't know, in the late 60s and early 70s, there was this really intense moment where there were hijackings as often as once a week, and it was what ultimately brought along the requirement of the security checks and things like that. So Susie comes to Sala del Mar in the beginning of the book, and this is a scene. The first part of the book is set on the 4th of July, 1972, and this is just the beginning of the book when she's skateboarding down to the beach and sort of thinking about what has strangely brought her to this very, very strange land. Okay. See it like Susie sees it. The wide white beach, the blue carpet rolling out to the edge, the red body cinched around the courts at 19th Street. The peninsula to the north and the peninsula to the south bookends on the bay. Just imagine how that view might register in the body of someone still getting used to living at the ocean, how it might bleach her judgment, boost her nerve, and lead her to places she never meant to go. This is what it looks like from the top of 19th, where the blacktop green flags its tumble to the water. As she steers her eyes over the edge, her body follows. Susie carving. Susie rolling the board with the arches of her feet, all heels to all toes, way out wide and again across the middle. Susie skimming the yellow center line and snapping back at the curb, hard rubber and asphalt pinging like a typewriter. Susie upright but curved like parentheses, shifting open and closed, tracing even switchbacks, leveling the grade. Susie's got a cotton dress over an American flag bikini, striped bottoms knotted at the hip. Her light red hair blows back behind her like a vinyl banner tailing a single-edged Cessna. Susie keeps her eyes on the asphalt but senses the beach growing closer, the music there sharpening from bass to melody. It's already packed, clusters buzzing over the radio. She should know some of them, these boys from here, those girls from nowhere. She should recognize the ones from work. 6 or 7 of the stews she flies with live in town. And from Howlers, she chatted with some staff at a show last weekend, plus Grace and Mike. It's Tuesday, Independence Day, and according to the note Grace left her this morning, Grace has all sorts of bitch and shit in store for the 4. Susie pulls up halfway down the hill to straighten her sandal. It is morning still, just before noon. It is cool and gray but bright, soft and expansive, like when a high-watt bulb sieves through a lampshade. Susie feels a sudden heat in her hair. There's an elevation all around. The houses lining the street, single-story and quietly proportioned, show themselves to be painted not shades of charcoal, but full-spectrum colors. The palms and elms and bougainvillea that edge the small yards plug in like strings of lights. White pickets, wet surfboards, neoprene bodysuits, salted and drying on the property fences. Susie lifts her sightline over the rooftops toward the sweep of the horizon and pushes her butterfly frames up the bridge of her nose. The water glints like a scattered handful of ground-up glass. The bottom half of the hill flattens out, and Susie picks a straight line toward the stand. She aims the nose of her board toward the courts at 19th and pulls herself tall like a bowstring. There's a busy avenue to cross at the bottom, and she barrels through with a quick prayer to the intersection. As she steps into the sand, the clouds break. To Susie Whitman, that promise of gray to blue, the burning off of the clouds on cue each day near noon, has become proof that Sala del Mar was the right place to land after all, the certain spot for her just now.
And it keeps going. It's such a good book. I feel the need to keep saying this.
Yeah, there's more pages. Yeah.
There's many more pages. It's a real good one.
Yeah.
This is like great summer reading weather, you know? Yeah. I guess it's always a good time to read. Next up, my pal Courtney Sullivan is the New York Times best-selling author of the novels The Engagements, Maine, and Commencement. and now the one with the longest title, Saints for All Occasions. She's contributed to a number of publications, including the New York Times Book Review, New York Magazine, Elle, Glamour, Allure, and more. She lives in Brooklyn, and I read that part. Her fourth novel, Saints for All Occasions, has been widely praised. It was heralded by the Washington Post's Ron Charles as the year's best book about family. A quiet masterpiece. Welcome, Courtney Sullivan.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? I'm sort of very awkward as I am now 38 weeks pregnant, so I'm going to talk fast because you just never know. But this is my fourth novel, and I think the sort of seeds for this novel were planted before I had published anything at all. The first time I went to Ireland, where my great-grandmother immigrated from, and went inside the one-room cottage where she grew up in a little town on the coast of Ireland called Milltown Malbay. And there was something about that experience and the fact that it was kind of the first time that it dawned on me that it was because of this woman immigrating alone to Boston at 17 that our family is American. And it was something that had this kind of shimmer to it. I didn't write about it right away, but I put it in my pocket for later, as novelists tend to do. A few years went by, and I was working on my second novel, Maine, which is about a big dysfunctional Irish Catholic family from Boston, which happens to be a topic I know a lot about. And at the time, I was chatting with some girlfriends I grew up with, all of whom grew up Irish Catholic as well, and I asked them, what are some of the experiences you would put into a novel about growing up Irish Catholic? And someone said, you've got to talk about the Irish step dancing lessons that we were all made to endure, and the fact that as a result of them, none of us can dance like normal people now. Someone said, write about the Balik china that all our mothers collected. But someone else said, you should really write about the fact that in every Irish Catholic family, there's this person, this relative who no one ever talks about, who half the people don't even know exists, until one day he shows up at someone's wake. And I thought, that's interesting, and kind of put that away for later as well. I wrote my third novel, The Engagements, and when I was done with that book, my aunt kept telling me, I have this great idea for what you should write about next. And as any of the novelists here can tell you, when someone tells you they have a great idea for what you should write next, it's usually a terrible idea. But my aunt said she thought I should write a novel about cloistered nuns. And as a lapsed Catholic, I thought, I'm not sure I want to spend years with cloistered nuns. But she said, you've got to meet this nun, Mother Lucia, a cloistered nun who was a family friend of ours who went into a cloister before I was born. And eventually we actually started writing letters to each other. I went and spent a couple of weeks at this abbey in Connecticut, and I was actually really intrigued and fascinated, and ended up writing this novel, which is about two sisters who immigrate from Milltown Malbay, Ireland, to Boston. Something separates the two of them. One becomes a mother of 4 children. One becomes a cloistered nun. And most of the family doesn't know that this cloistered nun even exists until one day she shows up at a family wake. And hijinks ensue. So that's the book. I'll just read you the first page. In the car on the way to the hospital, Nora remembered how, when Patrick was small, she would wake up suddenly, gripped by some terrible fear. That he had stopped breathing or spiked a deadly fever, that he had been taken from her. She had to see him, to be sure. They lived then on the top floor of the 3-decker on Crescent Avenue. She would practically sleepwalk through the kitchen and past Bridget's door and then down the hall to the boys' room, her nightgown skimming the cold hardwood, the muffled sound of Mr. Sheehan's radio murmuring up from downstairs. The fear returned the summer Patrick was 16 when they moved to the big house in Hull. Nora would awaken, heart pounding, thinking of him and of her sister. Images past and present wound up in one another. She worried about the crowd he ran with, about his anger and his moods, about things he had done that could never be undone. She met her worries in the same old way. Whatever the hour, she would rise to her feet and climb the attic stairs to Patrick's bedroom so that she might lay eyes on him. This was a bargain she struck, a ritual to guarantee safety. Nothing truly bad could happen if she was expecting it. Over the years, there were times when one of her other three consumed her thoughts. As they got older, Nora knew them better. That was something no one ever told you, that you would have to get to know your own children. John wanted too much to please her. Bridget was a hopeless tomboy. They had carried these traits along with them into adulthood. When Brian, her baby, moved away, Nora worried. She worried ever more so when he moved back in. But it was Patrick who weighed most on her mind. He was 50 now. For the past several months, the old fear had returned. Ever since John kicked things up again, things she had long considered safely in the past. Unable to check on Patrick on those nights when the feeling arose, Nora would switch on the lamp and shuffle through her prayer cards until she came to Saint Monica, patron saint of mothers with difficult children. She slept with the card face up on Charlie's empty pillow. Tonight, for once, she hadn't been thinking of Patrick. Of all things, she was thinking about the boiler down cellar. It had been clanging since just after supper. Adjusting the temperature didn't help. Nora thought she might have to bleed the pipes. As a last resort, she tried saying a rosary to make it stop. When this seemed to do the trick, she went to bed with a fat grin on her face, thus assured of her own powers. She was awakened not long after by the ringing telephone, a stranger's voice saying there had been an accident. She should come right away. By the time she reached the emergency room, pink flannel pajamas under her winter coat, Patrick was already gone. Sorry, that's a downer.
And finally, I saw Julia host a panel here for the summer of 14, and I thought, I want to do that when I grow up. So thank you, Julia Fierro, for setting the stage for what I would love to come to do here in New York. Julia Fierro's new novel, also out yesterday, The Gypsy Moth Summer, and she's had some special voodoo on the gypsy. Every time I hear gypsy moth, we're just all over this. Every time I see a caterpillar, I think of Julia. Jodi Picoult calls it a hazy, hot daydream of a hidden truth, scandal, and racial prejudice. Amy Bloom says it's irresistible storytelling. Publishers Weekly called it powerful and riveting. A graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, Julia founded the Sackett Street Writers Workshop in 2002, which has grown into a creative home to 4,000 writers in New York City, Los Angeles, and online. Sackett Street Writers Workshop was named Best Writing Classes by The Village Voice, Time Out New York, and Best MFA Alternative by Poets and Writers, Brooklyn Magazine, and the Elle Magazine. Another winning novel. Welcome back to our tent here, Julia Fierro.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think this is my third time in this series, and which is just such a wonderful place to be. And thank you, Susie. And also I want to thank Robin, who's really just an amazingly generous supporter of writers and readers and books. And I also want to say my mom's maiden name is Doherty. Oh. And even though she married an Italian, but there's a lot of holy water in their house. And they like to sprinkle my children. Even though I married a Jewish man. With holy water, yeah, okay. So this is my second published novel, and it just came out yesterday, so I haven't really summarized it that much, but I'll be brief. It's set in the summer of 1992, just in case, not 1892, on an island called Avalon Island, a fictional island that's a lot like Long Island. But smaller. It's told through the perspectives of 5 characters. A teenage boy, a teenage girl, a middle-aged landscape architect, and a aging matriarch. So I'm just going to read maybe a couple of paragraphs. It's it's really hard to describe your own book. It's much easier just to read from it. You guys did a great job.
Didn't they? They did.
I learned a lot about how I should be doing it. This is the prologue. Before that summer of 92, when the gypsy moths swarmed Avalon Island, and Leslie Day Marshall, golden-headed prodigal daughter, returned with her black husband and brown children to claim her seat as First Lady, the island's crimes were minor. Teenagers breaking into a newly constructed mansion to throw a kegger, a maid stealing from her mistress, and occasionally a neighbor, the investment banker, disappearing for 6 months only to return lean and fit after a stay at a low-security prison. Before that summer of 92, people left their front doors unlocked when they turned in for the night. And children, even those who still believed in the witches and wolves of fairy tales, fled to the woods each evening. Be careful, their mothers called, as the children threw open screen doors and ran bare-legged into the birch turned blue by the otherworldly light that blanketed the island each night. But as children do, they believe themselves unbreakable, and deaf to mother's caution, they hurdled spice bush and witch hazel, laughing when a dewy spider web tore against their faces. No stories of little children lost to the woods, told by well-meaning mothers, could keep them from their games. The island's teenagers, too, felt safest in the woods. Camouflaged by thickets of black cherry and pitch pine, red chokeberry and sweet pepperbush, the cool night air a balm to their sunburned shoulders. Not yet men and women, and no longer boys and girls, they may have believed in fairy tales still, but wouldn't dare confess. They played their own games in the woodland pocked with fireflies. Girls shrieked when caught by a boy. Hands slipped under sweatshirts. The boldest couples retreated deep into the trees to roll on a sheet someone had swiped from his or her mother's linen closet. By summer's end, all of Avalon will have seen too much to play make-believe at love and war again. So let them believe for now. Let them play. Those girls with dimpled smiles and scraped knees. Those young men lean and long, but still capable of blushing. Those unformed and perhaps better versions of the men and women they will become. For now, they are young and beautiful, pure muscle and unblemished skin. They are in love, a faith that makes them tease death. They swing out over the sea cliffs, clutching a tire tied to a tree. Swim to the end of the ferry landing and back. Drag race down the wrong side of the causeway at 2 a.m. Fly headfirst toward danger, deaf to their mother's warnings. Be careful. All to win a bet, to prove they are what they feel, immortal.
The 5 books we're celebrating today are each set in a very distinct time period, interestingly. Saints for All Occasions begins in the late 50s, Fly Me in 70s, Subway Stops at Bryant Park beginning in the late 80s, The Gypsy Moth Summer in the summer of 92, and Current Day Touch, which I thought was kind of really cool. So, will you each share a little bit about how the time period informed the stories and what, if anything, you did to get into that time period, whether music, research, that sort of thing? Jump on in, Julia.
Okay. Well, I just happened to be 16 years old in 1992. And similarly to one of the characters in the book, Maddie, who was also 16. And I wanted to write about a time. Well, I remember a gypsy moth, infestation around that time, and it was just when you're a teenager on Long Island, you hang out in the woods a lot because there's not, or the mall, right? It's like the woods, the mall, or the beach, and the caterpillars were really a problem, and I wanted to write about that atmosphere. I also wanted to write about a pre-internet age. particularly because there's several characters who are teenagers, and there's also several adult characters, and I just, when we wanted information, we went to the library, or we made it up, or we eavesdropped on adults. And so, that's a very unique, well, I guess now it's unique. But, and also it was a big shift politically in the country with Bill Clinton, who has some, sort of cameo appearances in the book, becoming president at that time. So I was surprised by how exciting a time it was to write, because I was 16. I kind of didn't know what was going on. So I actually had to research, even though I was there, not paying attention. But
it does look different. Research would look very different than what your perceptions would be as a 16-year-old, depending on how much time in the woods you spent. So, who else would like to take that one? Courtney?
So completely different. My book's very much about the internet age, but it's present day-ish. It's not necessarily right now. It could have been a couple years. It takes place during a time where we are addicted to our cell phones. So, but in the book, I went out of my way to not brand anything, so there's no iPhones, there aren't any Androids or Blackberries, there are just smart devices and cell phones. No one Googles anything in my book. That word does not appear. I did that on purpose so that when you're reading it, first of all, you don't feel assaulted by these items that have become so ubiquitous. Because I know when I read a book and I see the word iPhone, I think, oh, my phone's going to ring in a second. It takes you out of the narrative. But when the reason I decided to focus on this kind of current moment that we're living is, again, when I started writing the book 3 years ago, just from having worked in trend forecasting, I felt that we were arriving at an apex in terms of our relationship to smart devices and the way they change our interpersonal relationships. And I felt that we would soon be at a moment where we're ready to evaluate the way that we connect digitally versus the way that we connect physically. And if there's any, now I don't want to make any assumptions, but if there's any silver lining to the person who is now sitting in the Oval Office, who I personally won't name, but it for me is that we are witnessing every single second the outcome of being totally addicted to your cell phone and what it does not just to your own life, but to the lives and the pulse rates of people around you. So that's why I chose this time period.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I was thinking it's been like a half an hour since I've held my phone. And I'm dying to get this photo.
I know.
Go ahead, Moth.
Well, the time frame of my book starts with the renovation of Bryant Park. Are there people who were here when Bryant Park was not in this current form? Oh, good. A lot of you. My dad was on the radio on WQXR for 50 years, and he had to get an apartment because if you had an audition at 10 in the morning and then you went on the air at 3, as he said, there are only so many movies you can watch every day. So they got an apartment there because it was so cheap, because this was known as Needle Park, and it was up higher, and there were hedges, boxwood hedges all the way around the edges of it, and I think I saw Dan Biederman, but he had to leave, but Dan Biederman and the Bryant Park group came in and decided to lower the park. And so the first story in the collection is about that, about taking something that is sort of an eyesore, scary, avoided, and making it into something better, progress, but also how that progress has a double edge to it. And anyone who's a New Yorker is aware of that double edge of progress, because if you want to get a cup of coffee at the Bryant Park Hotel, it's $9 a cup. which is great. But not if you're me or the doorman of the building who became a friend of the family, or the guy who sweeps up in the park, or any of the people who are my people, my friends and the waitresses and the students and the artists. So it's really great, and it also shuts people out, and that's something that I really wanted to explore about New York City, and the park was a good metaphor for that. And so I just sort of followed that, and that was how I picked the time frame, like from its, I guess, low point, if you want to call it that, to where it is now, which is pretty magnificent, with free. I have a friend in from out of town who stayed and watched the free juggling for a few hours. Like, it's quite an amazing place, kind of magical wonderland. I don't know how to describe it, but so different, and New York writ small is sort of captured in all the changes in New York in my lifetime. Yeah.
Thank you. Do you want to take a stab at that one?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, the book is set in 1972 and 73, and that time period, for a lot of obvious reasons, is this kind of astonishing moment of transition and tumult, and in the culture widely, but also in Southern California, and especially in the airline industry. That's actually a moment when in the airlines, it was a couple years before the equal rights. A Supreme Court case made it so that women didn't have to be sort of subject to these crazy standards of height and weight restrictions and beauty standards, and the fact that you could still get fired when you got married or pregnant. And so there's this actually really interesting moment to put something like that up against the skyjacking epidemic that I was talking about earlier. That made this a really ripe moment to be kind of in that world. But just kind of on the logistical question of the book takes place 14 years before I was born, and it took a lot to kind of get back into that world. And I actually it's a pretty musical novel. There's a lot of
music,
a lot of rock and roll in it, and so I actually did have playlists and tons of photo research in sort of slideshows that I would have, just to even stuff that would kind of trigger just scenes or places or music halls or the inside of of one of these airplanes, to kind of just look around in the book, and you're kind of looking out the window or seeing what the upholstery looks like and kind of getting that sensory detail. And then my mom and her sisters grew up in the beach town that I grew up in. And so whenever there were actual questions or things that were taking liberties with, I would kind of always jump back to them and be like, what's, and they could say, we wouldn't have said that, or these swim trunks weren't around for another 3 years or whatever. And so yeah, it was kind of this fun interplay of having those things to dip into, and then having good people around to sort of to check against.
The musical references were wonderful. I saw Badfinger jumped out, and then even the title, I was waffling between Fly Me to the Moon and Come Fly With Me. I was just like, that book just was, circling around in my head. Courtney, would you like to round out the answers?
Sure. So my book begins in 1957 or 58, and it kind of goes back and forth between then and present day, although the present day of the novel is 2009. I guess for a lot of different reasons. First of all, I'm always interested in looking at characters over time and how people are shaped by the changing decades. So the characters you meet who come over from Ireland in their teens and 20s and the 50s are now, in 2009, living out a lot of the choices that they made as young men and women, who they married, whether or when they had kids, and all of that. And I guess I'm interested in looking at particularly women in the context of the moment they're born and what that sort of allows them to do. In this book, to a large extent, it's about birth. So there's a lot about, strangely enough, motherhood in this book, and who is a mother and how does one become a mother. There are adoptive mothers, there are sort of accidental mothers, there are birth mothers. There's two sisters who come over in the 50s from Ireland. I think what really interested me sort of as a jumping off point for this book was that with Irish immigration in particular, it so often has been young women traveling alone. And a lot of the people I interviewed for this book are women, mostly my friends' grandmothers, who immigrated in the 50s from Ireland to Boston. When you're a kid and someone is your friend's grandmother, you just think of them as like they were just born an old lady, fully formed that way. But in fact, all of these women had these incredible stories about, growing up in tiny towns, never even being allowed to go to a dance alone or go into town alone, and then suddenly being alone on a ship to America and having their lives completely changed. And that, to me, was so fascinating. And so that's why it sort of begins in the 50s. And you see how time and the Catholic Church and a lot of other things sort of shape these two sisters as the decades progress.
Thank you. One of the other commonalities with all of your books is really, really interesting epigrams. And I always wonder how those get selected. Is this a big mulling process, or is it just like, okay, this is the perfect thing? If you want to read each of yours and talk about where that came from.
Such a good question, Robin.
Thank
I love
you, Courtney. Just jumped out.
For a second, I was like, wait, I know what that is.
I had to make sure I was saying the right word.
I just
could have been epitaph. Fet, right.
It's this thing.
That thing at the beginning, that quote there.
So, of course, like as writers, or I'll just speak for myself. Sorry, guys. I'm deeply insecure, and so I had like 6, right? And my editor was like, Julia, and I was like, this is the book that gets the Bible. This gets a Bible quote. And she was like, no. And she was right. But I had been holding on to this quote for, I don't know, maybe a decade more, or maybe more. And because I think of this book as a anti-revenge story. And actually, just it's only one sentence. When I was getting my MFA, my graduate degree in writing in Iowa, Kurt Vonnegut visited, and he was, we were like in a dorm hall, and he was chain smoking, which was just like he was such a rebel. And then he told us that there were too many revenge stories in America, and I've thought about that, in the movies, like, and if you look at my Netflix queue, it's like gritty, violent revenge thrillers, and I'm like, I grew up watching a lot of war movies with my mom, who's a lot older, and so I worried while I was writing this book. I'm like, is this a revenge story? Is it a revenge story? And then I decided it was an anti-revenge story. But life being what it is, one dreams of revenge, and it's Paul Gauguin.
Thank you.
It's a good one. Right?
It's really good.
I don't know why, but I feel that since you just mentioned Kurt Vonnegut chain smoking, I feel like I have to say that I went to Smith College in Massachusetts, and one semester Kurt Vonnegut actually came and taught a master class in writing, and it was so thrilling, and I got to be in the class, and it was just like we were thrilled. We were very used to people coming in and like being inspiring and talking about women's education and the fact they wanted to be at an all-women's college, and Kurt Vonnegut came in and he's like, well, I was smoking in the barn and I accidentally burned it down. So my wife said I had to do something. So I'm just teaching this class to like keep busy. But he did get much more inspiring from there. But anyway,
what year was that?
Led to burning down the barn.
What year was that?
2002.
Oh my gosh. He came to my program and then he said, I've been working with young women.
Ah, there you go. So
and they are the best writers in the country. I swear.
Oh, yeah.
He was talking about. Oh my goodness.
That's very.
Wow, that was like.
Anyway, sorry. So my epigram is from a Margaret Atwood poem called Corpse Song, and it is, I exist in two places, here and where you are. And I feel like that line, those two lines, very much sum up the relationship between the sisters in the book, who are estranged for 30 years, but in a way, I think,
sometimes the people you're estranged from or who are absent in your life kind of loom the largest. And also just in the relationship between family members. I think oftentimes you do exist where you are and where these other people are. And it's also, I think, very apt for a story about people who leave their home country and never return to it. So it had a lot of resonance for me for that reason.
Mine is a quote from an essay by Joan Didion, who's really like a major kind of unspoken force in the book, definitely like the godmother of this book. And it's a quote about a place and also like a very unique force that occurs within that place that when you're asking just like when it comes up, this was actually before really any of the book was written. I remember seeing this and was like, this is the whole thing. So it's, California is a place in which a boom mentality and a sense of Chekhovian loss meet in uneasy suspension, in which the mind is troubled by some buried but ineradicable suspicion that things better work here, because here, beneath the immense bleached sky, is where we run out of continent. And just that idea of being forced, of being forced to the edge there, and what happens when you get pushed to the edge is really something that happens. The book sort of starts laconically and a little bit safely, and then throughout the entire narrative, sort of layers get peeled away, and that idea of what happens when you're pushed to the edge really becomes sort of the animating principle of it. And I just love that. I love her love-hate relationship with the place, and it's just so kind of perfectly complicated.
Thank you.
I love that.
It's a good one.
I love that so much. This is such a great question. Epigrams to me are incredibly important. They're actually, don't tell my loved ones, but they're more important to me than the dedication, because I think that they're supercharged with a frequency that you're sort of announcing the tone of the book. This is mine. That finally the door opens, and it opens outward. We've been inside what we wanted all along. It's from David Foster Wallace. He wrote that in 1999. I love the quote. It stands for what this book is about, but I also love that it's by David Foster Wallace, who I didn't know him personally, but through his work, to me, was a creative, very vibrant soul who was not able to stay in our world. And it's also from 1999, which was such a pivotal change, right before the year 2000. So it means a lot to me.
It's a really good. They were all really beautiful. Susie tells me it's time to start questions, but before we do, I have all these questions. Next time we need like 2 hours, if that's good. You won't mind. And just run down the line a book that you want to suggest that that you're reading this summer or that you want to recommend besides these 5 fabulous ones. But just we'll shoot it through and then we'll take questions.
There's a very short storybook by a Dutch writer called A.L. Snijders. It's spelled Snijders, and they're all one page. They're these super compact, beautiful short stories that have changed my writing that I discovered when I was in Holland a few months ago.
Thanks, West.
Also, another book birthday from yesterday, Stephen Florida by Gabe Habash, out with Coffee House Press. It's an incredible voice-driven novel about a senior wrestler in college approaching the very last match of his career.
I just read an old out-of-print book kind of set in this world, if you're interested, in California of the 70s called Cutter and Bone, that inspired this movie Cutter's Way back in the 70s. It was a Jeff Bridges movie that took kind of him to Santa Barbara, this great supercharged kind of murder mystery, but it's just this beautiful book that if you're again interested in that area, I kind of can't believe I hadn't heard of it, and that more people don't know about it. But I've been kind of like beating that drum for the last few weeks after finishing it.
Thank you.
I've been beating the Anne Enright drum for a while because she is, I think, the fiction laureate of Ireland. She's absolutely beloved in Ireland, but less read here. She's a fantastic fiction writer. I recommend her book, The Gathering, but really any of her books. If you're a writer, at least if you're like me, they'll make you think that you should stop writing immediately and become a travel agent because there's no hope. She's just so freaking amazing that you could never dream of writing as well as she does.
I love that book.
Isn't it amazing? Yes.
This is such a hard question.
I know.
And I want to mention all the books by the people that I love who are in the audience. But you can come and talk to me about that after, and I'll give you a list. Who likes true crime-ish books? Maybe I'll mention a nonfiction book. The Poisoner's Handbook. It's not new. It's by Deborah Blum, B-L-U-M. And it sounds really depressing because it's about how people basically poison themselves all the time until we had regulations, like when we had gas lighting. But it'll make you feel really good about living now when we have that kind of stuff. So basically, people used to accidentally poison themselves all the time, and
Stuff
now
happens.
Now we have like the FDA, and you know, I'm happy about that.
Thank you. And I'm going to just put a plug in for The Awkward Age, Francesca Siegel. That was one of my favorites. It's really, and so many. And email everybody or check out Facebook pages. So we have questions. Who has a question? Who has the microphone to ask the question? Oh, you do. Anyone have a question? Because we'll keep talking. Oh, there's a question up here. Thank you. No shouting. This is very quiet, low-key reading room.
I have a question for Courtney. I have two. Can I do two?
Sure.
Okay, good. I'll be quick.
I guess. I don't know.
So, as you were writing about the 50s and also Catholicism, I'm working on a book that also deals a lot with Catholicism. I'm wondering if you stumbled a lot over the pre-Vatican II Catholicism experience and the post-Vatican II. Was that like two different...
Yeah.
Like, I can't even... I was like, wait, I'm sorry. You went every week to listen to a language you could not understand and had... Like, I'm just like... Anyway,
yeah.
Okay, good. And then...
That's certainly a huge part of the sort of shifting tide within this family in the novel is the fact that in the sort of pre-Vatican II generation of the family, the church really rules their lives, and everything that they do and every decision that they make is made with that in mind. Now, the more modern generation, the children of these women, that's not how they really live their lives at all. And since one of the characters in the book is a nun, there's quite a bit about what Vatican II did to clergy members and how it changed their roles. So definitely it's in there. Thank you.
Other questions? No? How are we doing for time, Susan?
Miranda has a question.
Okay.
Oh, behind the pole where you can... With the baby. With the baby.
The baby has a question.
The baby
Hi.
He's coming.
This is Miranda Beverly Whittemore, a novelist.
Oh, wait, Miranda? I didn't see you.
Hi, everyone. I have a question about how I'm just starting a new book, and so I'm thinking about starting books and how hard it is. And I'm just wondering if you each want to talk about, or some of you want to talk about the seed for this book, or kind of the I guess the moment in when you're thinking about writing a new book. And then you're really realizing, oh, God, I have to do this. What that moment is when it, like, the snowball starts rolling down the hill and you realize this is inevitable and I have to do it.
Can I?
Go ahead, yeah.
I'm a very impatient person. Impatient. I don't want to accidentally say patient. Impatient person. And with myself and actually other people too. And... but mostly myself. And so, sometimes it's not the right time in your life to write a certain book. Because for me, I wasn't ready to write The Gypsy Moth Summer until I was a little bit older. But I did write a character sketch of the Colonel, who runs the aviation company in the book, which is similar to Grumman, but it's called Gritter. And I wrote a sketch of him when I was in college. It was the first piece of writing that I wrote. And then I put it away, and I kind of toyed with it over almost 2 decades, thinking that it was done or that it would never amount to anything. And then it did. So it's kind of like a hopeful, thing that you don't really know. And then, I just knew after I had finished my first book, and I was like, I can write a novel. I felt like I was ready to go back to it and write a bigger novel, thematically. So yeah.
Thank you. I didn't even realize that was Miranda Beverly Whittemore, author of Bittersweet and June, out in paperback right now. I didn't even see you were there. I was told to wrap it up, right, Susie? I was told to this. It's a sad sign of wrapping up. I want to thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. If you're so inclined, please leave reviews on Goodreads and Amazon. It really does help the authors, and it's greatly appreciated if you're on Facebook or all the social media platforms. Yeah, obviously, good reviews. And also like everybody. We all like to be liked, including Reading with Robin. And if you aren't on Amazon or Goodreads, do it the old-fashioned way, a la Touch, and just tell your friend. And looking forward to seeing you all next summer. Thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you, Robin. That was wonderful. Thank you all so much. Good luck with your books. And please support our authors.
Yes, get books. They're signing right up here.
Oh, we're going to sign up here?
Yeah.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
I wish that I had.